This is episode 2 of my series, and I'll be explaining how I got 99 out of 100 on the AQA DT GCSE Theory exam. If you don't know me already, I'm Ryan Chima. I just achieved 12 9s in my GCSEs, which places me in about the top 10 students in the entire of Britain going into year 12. So trust me when I say I know how to study effectively. As you probably know already, the grade boundaries for AQA GCSE DT are insanely high, usually at around 88 to 90%. This is mostly to do with the NEA side of it being weighted 50%, so people that perform less well in exams can still do really well. In the exam, there's 3 main sections, section A, B and C, and if you want to do well, you need to do absolutely insane in all 3 sections. Section A examines the core technical principles, or DT, so it's 20 marks, 10 marks multiple choice, and then 10 marks short answer questions. Realistically, this should be the section you do the best in, because if you paid attention in lessons and done any amount of revision, you should be getting quite high marks on this. What you need to do well in this is quite a strong knowledge of DT in general, so you need to pay attention in your lessons and maybe read some of the textbook, or just do your homework, or even spam the flashcards that I'm linking in the comments, focused on AQA DT. So these questions are often quite repeated, so if you look at past papers and you can do all of the section A questions, then you're likely to do quite well in the final exam. Section B is the specialist technical principles, worth 30 marks. This is part of the exam where there might be certain options if you choose textiles or woodworking or even metalworking and polymers. So these questions are slightly more DT focused, where you have to, like, for example, draw and label a diagram when you're using wood turning or a center lathe, for example. So for this, you actually need to understand how the DT equipment works, and you need to be able to draw effectively and label it in a coherent way so you can ensure full marks. There's also other questions here that may pop up that are similar to the section C questions, where it might ask you something about pollution, but generally these questions are quite simple. Maybe there's a few calculations if you're lucky, but if the calculations do come up, they will be quite easy. Section C is designing and making principles. It's 50 marks, which is a quarter of your GCSE. In my opinion, this is the hardest section, but if you revise it enough, you can absolutely cook. So what comes up in this section every year is an 8 marker, which is the longest extended response question. The way you're going to answer this is in short bullet points. You need 4 or 5 bullet points with a point and an explanation related to the question. The other types of questions that come up in this is when you have to analyze or evaluate certain images of products. For this, there's usually 3-4 mark questions in which you have to break down, for example, the ergonomics for one, the aesthetics for another, and the functionality for another. This you have to be really organized and label each of the specification points and the diagrams to make sure that you're coherent and none of your ideas are repeated. There's also often some calculations that come up in this, but if you're any good at maths, you should find these calculations like 3 marks, because they're usually to do with the area of shapes or tessellations. It comes up most in section C, but throughout the paper you can find questions that should be like common sense to you, because they might be about climate change or product miles, where if you just put your thoughts coherently on the page, you should be getting full marks on those questions. So the best methods to revise for the exam would be do the questions in your textbook if it has any, or go onto websites like BBC Bitesize to get specific questions on specific topics. Unfortunately, the GOAT, Save My Exams, doesn't have AQA GCSE DT, but you can find a lot of other resources online. I'm also going to be linking the flashcards in the comments below, so you can just spam them if you need to. Another thing, for the 8 markers, if you're practicing them, it's really important to get your teacher's feedback. So just spam all of the 8 markers in the past paper questions and give them to your teacher, and tell them ask them what you need to do to improve. Make sure you're doing these under time conditions, because there's no point practicing it with 20 minutes in studying and then going in an exam and only having 10 minutes to write it, because then you'll be cooked. So DT is kind of like science when you're revising it, so you need to do a mixture of flashcards, practice questions, etc. But one thing that is kind of annoying is that there's only like 5 or 6 past papers for DT, and then if you go to the old specification for AQA DT, there are some past papers, but they're really different, so I wouldn't really advise doing these old past papers, but just spam the questions that you can. If you have a revision guide, it's really important to read through that if it's short, or just do the questions at the end of it, because the active recall for this subject, once you know it, and it's kind of like common sense, if you get me. If you use these methods effectively, hopefully next year you can get a higher mark than me. Also, if you haven't seen it already, go onto my TikTok and watch the NEA video where I explain how I got 95 out of 100 on the NEA and secured my grade 9.